It was just after 10 p.m. when Marcus Williams pulled into the gas station. The night had been long, filled with the familiar hum of the road, the repetitive sound of tires rolling over cracked pavement, and the occasional flicker of headlights from passing cars. It had been a few years since he'd gotten out of the army, but the weight of it never truly left him. He didn't miss the wars or the chaos, but he missed the clarity, the way his life had purpose, and his days had structure. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. Marcus hadn't planned on stopping at the gas station. But the low fuel light had flashed on, a reminder of the small things he often neglected. He rubbed his eyes, stretching his neck as he parked near the pumps. The cold night air hit his face as he stepped out of his car. The gas station was quiet, just the faint buzzing of the neon lights and the occasional flick of a moth's wings. His boots clicked against the pavement as he approached the pump, pulling the nozzle from the holder and beginning to fill his tank. There were 2 patrol cars parked at the far side of the lot. Marcus noticed the officers leaning against their cars, chatting amongst themselves, laughing in a way that didn't quite sit right. It felt off, but he didn't want to read too much into it. As he finished pumping the gas, he reached for his wallet to pay. That's when he heard the shout. "Hey, you!" Marcus turned around slowly, recognizing the voice as one of the officers. The man was tall, with a sharp jawline and cold eyes. His partner, a woman, stood a few feet away, watching with a disinterested expression. "Yeah," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady, though something in his gut twisted. "You're blocking the sidewalk," the officer said, pointing to where Marcus's car was parked. "I'm just getting gas," Marcus replied, his hand tightening around the nozzle. "I'll be done in a minute." The officer sneered. "I don't think you heard me. Move your car." Marcus's heart rate picked up. He didn't want any trouble, but he also wasn't the kind of man to back down from a confrontation. "It's a gas station, man," he said. "There's no sidewalk here." The officer took a step forward, his face contorted in frustration. "You think you can talk back to me?" he asked, his voice now edged with aggression. Marcus felt his pulse thrum in his ears. He had seen the signs before, small confrontations that could quickly escalate if not handled carefully. But tonight, there was something about the officer's tone that made him bristle. He had been through too much, seen too much in his life to let some random cop push him around. "I'm just trying to get home," Marcus said, trying to de-escalate. "There's no need for this." The officer's face twisted into something darker. "No need? You don't tell me what the need is. You're just a nobody." The words hit Marcus like a slap. He had heard slurs before, hell, he had lived through them. But something about this officer's words, this quiet disdain, struck him in a way that made him feel small. He stood there for a moment, taking in a deep breath, his hands still gripping the nozzle. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to be that guy. He had been in too many fights, too many situations where things got out of hand. But this time, something felt different. Something in the officer's eyes told him it was too late for peace. Before he could say anything else, the officer lunged, grabbing Marcus's arm and twisting it behind his back. "You're not going anywhere, not until I say so," the officer snarled. The pain shot through Marcus's shoulder, and he stumbled forward, trying to break free. "Let go of me," he shouted, his voice louder now, desperate. "I didn't do anything wrong." The woman officer stepped forward then, pulling out her baton. "You need to calm down," she said, her voice cold. But Marcus was beyond calming down. The anger, the frustration, it all surged up inside him, fueled by years of oppression, years of mistreatment. He had been called a threat, been accused of crimes he didn't commit, been targeted for his skin color more times than he could count. And now, these 2 cops were trying to make him feel like he was nothing more than an animal in their eyes. "Don't touch me!" Marcus yelled, struggling more now, trying to break free from the officer's grip. But the officer tightened his hold, pulling Marcus to the ground. His knee pressed into Marcus's back, and the officer's voice was low and dangerous. "You're not the only one who served," he said, his words thick with venom. "You think you're special because you were in the army? I've been in this job long enough to deal with people like you." The world seemed to slow down. Marcus could feel the cold asphalt beneath him, the sharp pain in his arm, the weight of the officer's knee pressing into his spine. His mind raced. He was a veteran. He had fought for this country. And now, he was being treated like a criminal in front of everyone. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp voice rang out. "Get off him." It was a man's voice, angry, but firm. Marcus glanced up, his vision blurred, but he saw a figure approaching. Another man, tall, with a scar across his cheek, stepped toward the officers, his hand raised. "I said, get off him," the man repeated. The officer on top of Marcus hesitated, glancing over at his partner. For a moment, the woman officer seemed unsure, but the male officer stood up, shaking his head. "What the hell is your problem?" the officer demanded. The man didn't back down. "My problem is you assaulting a man for no damn reason. You got a badge, but that doesn't give you the right to act like this." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the woman officer stepped forward. "You better watch your mouth," she warned. "This isn't your business." But the man didn't flinch. "I don't care," he said, his voice unwavering. "I've seen enough." There was a tense standoff for a moment. And then, the officer who had been on top of Marcus stepped back, pulling his partner with him. "You're lucky," he muttered under his breath, "or I would have made this a lot worse for you." Marcus was left kneeling on the pavement, his heart still racing. His body ached, and his mind felt like it was spinning. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had been assaulted, humiliated, in front of a crowd, for nothing. The man who had stepped in walked over to Marcus, offering him a hand. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Marcus didn't take his hand immediately. He was still processing, still trying to make sense of it all. But after a moment, he nodded, slowly rising to his feet. "Yeah," he said, his voice hoarse. "I think so." "You need to report them," the man said, his voice firm. "What they did, it's not right." Marcus shook his head. "I've dealt with this kind of thing before," he said quietly. "But I'm not sure it's worth it." The man looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "It is worth it," he said. "You're a veteran. You deserve respect, not this." The officers had already gotten into their cars and started to drive off. Marcus watched them go, the rage still boiling in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the few people who had gathered, but none of them said a word. "Thank you," Marcus finally said to the man. "For stepping in." The man nodded again. "It's what we all should do. Stand up for each other." As the man turned to leave, Marcus felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It wasn't just the man who had helped him. It was the idea that there were still people who cared. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Marcus stood there for a few more moments, taking in the weight of what had just happened. The quiet of the gas station felt louder now, the hum of the neon lights seeming almost mocking against the storm of emotions brewing inside him. His back still ached where the officer had pressed his knee, but it was nothing compared to the anger seething within him. He had never liked confrontation, especially not in the way that had unfolded tonight. But the humiliation, the unprovoked violence, was something he couldn't just walk away from. He glanced back at the retreating figure of the man who had helped him. A part of him wanted to call out, to ask for his name or to say something that would acknowledge the rare act of kindness he had just witnessed. But the words got caught in his throat. The world was full of people who would do the right thing when they had to, but how often did it really happen? The roar of a passing car snapped Marcus back into reality. The parking lot was still eerily quiet, and the officers had driven off, but the damage lingered. His mind raced, replaying the moment again and again, wondering if he had done enough to defend himself, if he could have done more. Could he have just walked away? Did he need to take it further? He didn't know the answers. Pulling his jacket tighter around him, Marcus walked back to his car, his steps slow, deliberate. He fumbled for the door handle, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped it. His gaze wandered to the sky, now dotted with the faintest glimmer of stars. It was a small comfort, something familiar that didn't change, no matter what was going on below. As he sat back in the driver's seat, Marcus felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. His body ached, his muscles stiff from the struggle, but his mind was the heaviest. He was used to fighting, he had done it in combat, and he had done it for his country. But this? This was different. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't about enemy lines or mission objectives. It was about proving his humanity in a world that so often saw him as less than. He started the engine, the low rumble of the car filling the silence. For a moment, he just sat there, the headlights illuminating the dark asphalt ahead of him. His eyes drifted to the rearview mirror, catching the reflection of his own face, a face that had seen so much, yet was still here. Still fighting. But as he shifted into drive, something in him shifted too. A few days later, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. But the calm didn't match his thoughts. He had spent the night thinking about what had happened at the gas station. The man who had helped him, he hadn't just stepped in because he was some random bystander. There had been something about the way he stood up to the officers, something defiant and firm that made Marcus question his own passivity. The man had been right. The assault, the abuse of power, was something he couldn't just let slide. He had been an army veteran, but he was also a man who had to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. Even when it meant challenging the system that had always worked to suppress him. Marcus picked up his phone, scrolling through contacts before stopping on a name he hadn't called in a while, Detective Laura Haynes. Laura had been a fellow Army vet who had transitioned into law enforcement a few years before Marcus. They hadn't kept in touch after their respective retirements, but they had worked together on several cases involving military personnel before. He hesitated, then dialed her number. It rang twice before she picked up. Haynes. "It's Marcus," he said, trying to sound casual but knowing his voice was tinged with urgency. "I need some help." There was a pause on the other end, and Marcus could hear the faint noise of her office background before she spoke again. "What's going on?" "I was at a gas station the other night," Marcus began. "Two officers tried to harass me. Things got physical. They tried to arrest me for no reason." He could hear her take a sharp breath. "Did you file a report?" "No," he admitted. "I didn't. But I think it's time to. I'm done just letting it go." There was a long pause, and then Laura spoke again. "You've got to be careful, Marcus. You know how this system works. A lot of people don't want to go after their own." "I know," he said, his jaw tightening. "But I can't live with myself if I don't at least try. I've been through too much, seen too much to keep letting people like that get away with it." Laura sighed. "All right. Let's do this the right way. I'll need all the details you can give me. Every bit of information." Marcus felt a little lighter after the conversation, a small step toward reclaiming control. The system may have been flawed, but that didn't mean he had to accept the way it was. He didn't have to lie down and take it. A week later, Marcus was sitting in Laura's office, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. They had compiled a report, gathered witness statements, and even reviewed the gas station security footage. It was clear from the video that the officers had acted without cause, escalating the situation unnecessarily. Laura was on the phone, speaking with the Internal Affairs Division. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him, though his mind kept wandering back to the gas station. He had done the right thing, but would it be enough? Would this lead to real change, or would it just be another report lost in the shuffle of bureaucratic apathy? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stop now. He couldn't just walk away and let the next person face the same injustice. As the conversation on the phone ended, Laura looked at him, her eyes steady and sure. "We're going to push this, Marcus. You're not in this alone." For the first time in days, Marcus allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. He wasn't alone anymore. He had taken a step, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, it was a step toward something better. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But maybe, just maybe, it was about to get a little bit easier.